Have you ever heard the phrase practice makes perfect? Well, that statement is not quite true. Today, we want to explore how we can better understand what practice actually gets us and how this understanding makes a difference when we approach learning in our classrooms. Practice doesn't make perfect. A more accurate saying is practice makes automatic. So when we practice various skills and knowledge with our students, we have to ask, what are we making automatic with our kids? You see, practice makes something automatic because practice trains our brains how to think and respond in given situations. Whatever we train our brain to do over and over again is what it will actually do when asked in the future. Practice doesn't mean that someone will do something perfectly in the future. All it means is that they will do whatever their brain has trained to do. The more we practice something, the more we can do it without thinking so hard about it. Think about a skill you have now and think about when you were just a beginner. As a beginner, you likely took longer and were worse than you are now, but you're skilled because you have put in the time and made corrections to improve as you went. Beginners become experts not just because they practiced, but because the time spent practicing was spent on practicing perfectly, on ironing out mistakes and refining the fundamentals over and over again. But if students repeat the same habit, weakness, or approach on a given task, then they are merely reinforcing their current level of achievement rather than improving. For example, if a student practices math problems over and over again but follows the wrong steps or fails to think about the logic behind them properly, then they are unlikely to demonstrate long-term improvement. The same is true with students' writing skills. Practice writing with the wrong approach or focus, and that wrong approach or focus will ultimately become core to their understanding of writing. So while practice is an essential part of how students transition from beginners to masters, teachers must remember that practice does not necessarily make perfect. Instead, they have to remember that practice makes automatic. If we're going to have students rehearse various skills over and over again with the hopes of mastery, then we must make sure students are approaching those skills with the right mindset and processes to actually obtain that mastery. Otherwise, we are just reinforcing inferior thinking. To make this happen in your classroom, ask yourself, what does perfect practice look like? You don't have to expect your students to demonstrate mastery in their practice right away, but you do need to help them run through the correct motions and mentalities from the beginning. If a student is learning a piece of piano music, for example, they might need to play slowly and focus on the correct dynamics, fingerings, and notes before their performance ready. What would this look like with the skills featured in your classroom? In addition to having students practice perfectly, you also need to create an environment where practice is welcomed and encouraged. Don't let students feel like they need to be perfect in front of one another, and don't make them feel inferior if their practice in front of you isn't spot on from the get-go. Instead, establish your classroom as a safe place to practice. Mistakes are welcome, failures are the norm, and learning from weaknesses is standard. Finally, remember that practice makes automatic applies to your own teaching craft as well. What are you doing automatically in your classroom? It's easy for us to go on autopilot year after year and repeat ourselves over and over again. But remind yourself that unless that practice is perfect, it's only making what you do automatic. If you want your automatic teaching skills to improve, then you've got to focus on your fundamentals and make sure that your day-to-day practice is done with the best intentions, research, and execution in mind. Reflect and improve on your experiences, and like your students, your own perfect practice will lead to perfect results.